about design patterns. Now, you're all probably familiar with the term blueprints, okay? When you work with an architect, often you talk about what you want, and then they come back with some sketches or blueprints and say, here it is. And if the sketches are done well, you're able to understand them, relate to them personally, and still really interact in an effective way. But when those drawings really turn into architectural drawings, there's a point that what often happens is you feel less engaged because you're not an architect. There's often a disconnect there. And what we want to do as much as possible is leverage a kind of root genius. Sometimes we're pretty smart as architects, okay, but we're never going to be as smart or as innovative as if we're working with everyone's ideas all the way through. In order to do that, in order to be innovative and creative together, we need to develop a kind of a common language. Okay, common things we refer to, and we've started doing it. You're referring to caves or hilltops or watering hole spaces or campfire spaces in a way where we've developed a common language. You now know what I mean, and I know what you mean. I know what you mean when you talk about a hilltop, and you know what I mean when I talk about a cave. We have a series of patterns. We have a book called The Language of School Design. We identify in there 25 some odd patterns. We're working with about 40 patterns now that we've published in various places around the world, but we will develop custom patterns with you that are particular to North Central, this project in Regina. This pattern, pattern number 1A, is we call it the Ford model, okay? This is, or a bells and cells school. It's a plan where you see rectilinear classrooms in a corridor, and that's what 95% of the schools in the world look like. Now, another pattern, a key one, is we call a learning studio, and that is looking at the classroom, the old classroom, which was typically a rectangle, and saying, wait a minute, more than one thing goes on in a classroom. You don't just teach in rows. Everyone talked about the 20 learning modalities this morning. I think only 3 people even talked about lecture. So if it's not all about lecture and there's different things going on, multiple activities, then why wouldn't the room have a shape to reflect that? So here you can see there's a bay that allows for a breakout space and soft seating. Here's a Hebrew school that we designed in Milwaukee, where you can see there's a kind of lecture, campfire, or storytelling mode here, and then there's a space for another kind of activity to go on in the same room. So that's a learning studio. It's a little different than a classroom. The studio implies different kind of learning modalities. Another pattern, this one's not in the book. We developed this working with a community outside of Melbourne. A very tough area, not so different from Regina, where the teacher said, we want to go past this Ford model of 1 teacher to 25 students, 1 teacher to 25 students, 1 to 25. We want it to be 4 teachers to 100 students. And we want that space to be more interconnected. Not the open classroom of the 70s, but we want some permeable borders, okay? And we don't want all the spaces to be identical. And here's an example of a learning suite like that at Cristo Rey, where you can see you've got small meeting rooms, larger studios, interacting with a common area. You've got low seating and high seating. You've got those sort of permeable connections between the spaces. This is a pattern we developed a response to. There's about 15 schools we've been involved with that all utilize this model, where instead of classrooms, you have a common area. You have a kind of cafe and project area here. And you have groups of students of the 10 to 12, 10 to 15, typically, that have their own individual workstations. High School for Recording Arts, not too far from Avalon, is also an advisory-based model. And it's also a school that's based very much on real life. We identified real life and play-based as being so important. To these kids, many of them would say music and hip-hop is their life, and it's also a form of play. And they would not be in school if it wasn't for a musical theme. On that advisory model and learning studio model is something we call the community center model. And you can see that community center model that Jeff just talked about. You can go from that rough sketch, I'm just going to go back a minute, that kind of sketch which is, it's beyond a design pattern, okay, that's a scale architectural drawing, to a drawing like this, which is in CAD, which is important. But so there's a higher level of accuracy, but we're also trying to, through color and furnishings and label, make sure that as a team we're all on track.
Like, where do you display like student pride and stuff? Is it just kind of their stuff is just smattered through?
Oh, well, there is student display on these walls. And there's student display as you walk in here. Mm-hmm. And actually all around there, part of the development of this is spaces for students. Here is a project that we're doing in Tasmania. This is the second phase. Jeff put a lot of time into this one, of a middle school, and you can see what the entryway looks like, where it's a place where students can, in the sun, actually go outside from their cafe. And this is a project that we're doing in Indonesia, where it's an international school for all Ks of 12, and you can see this is the entry to the kindergarten area. And you can see here at Cristo Rey, they've got small lockers, but they also have a place to hang their backpacks and coat hooks right nearby. It's a small grouping, and we have these caterpillar couches right there. So it's actually a fun place. There's like family groupings. The home-based area is not just a corridor and lockers, but it's actually a social gathering space as well. Sports are important, but throughout our lives, there's more than basketball, there's more than volleyball, there's many different kinds of health and fitness. So we want to keep that in mind. It could include yoga, for example, or it could be First Nations dancing. What about the outcomes? What about the data? You know, can we prove that this really worked? Well, we see some evidence here that this method works.